Well, hey, folks, it's Rick Wilson here. Welcome to the breakdown. Sorry, I was having a moment of minor being overcome by inanimate objects and technical matters. Well, welcome to the breakdown once again. Hope you're all doing well this evening, and thanks so much. We are so glad to be back with you guys live Tuesdays and Thursdays every week. And I wanted to say that today is one of those days where you have to keep it in perspective just how twisted and weird our politics have gotten. But we're going to be joined later tonight by an expert in Virginia politics, Kyle Kondik, who is at the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. And he is an absolutely insightful and brilliant guy. We're also going to be having Tara join us in a little while. She had a brief family emergency to deal with, but she's all good and going to be back with us in a little bit. And so as we start tonight, I want to say that we've got some insights from Kyle that are going to help you understand not only what's happening in the Virginia race, which is really an important race right now as November 2nd is racing toward us, but also a little bit about some studies they've done that explain the broader polarization in the country, the broader divisions in the country, and frankly, how both sides have entered into these sort of political silos where they have a really hard time communicating with each other, even though there are some remarkable areas of continuity between both sides that you'll be shocked to hear about. But while we get to that, I want to start out, as we tend to do, with last week in the Republican Party.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Location for the following passenger. Passenger Trump one, you know him? Trump one, you know him?
They deleted everything in Colorado. The whole election's deleted.
I'm in a job where you can go on cable TV and blame somebody for everything. And it's never my fault, right?
The characterization that the Democrats have made about the Border Patrol using them as whipping people coming across the border is false. They were simply maneuvering horses.
They're actually changing societally the whole country.
They want to demoralize the military, close the churches, destroy your faith in the American system, and then here they're going to come with the socialist program to run your life from cradle to grave, daylight to dark.
That's not representative government, ladies and gentlemen. That is behind closed doors, smoke-filled room, in this case not cigars, probably marijuana.
Shut the government down because the real world knows how to run without the government. We do not need the government.
Last week, Joe Biden speaks at the United Nations and says he's going to restore our relationship with our allies, as if it wasn't good under President Trump. It was great under President Trump.
Nature abhors a moron. Let's don't be moronic.
Ouch. Well, as always, last week in the Republican Party never fails to sort of capture the mania and the madness that we're seeing in what is left of that party today. I want to make a brief note today about the Facebook news we've been following, because as you know, I'm a person who believes that Facebook has had an enormously corrosive effect on our politics in this country, and an enormously dangerous effect on polarization and the rise of some violent kind of factionalization in our politics. But this week, everyone's talking about Facebook, not only because of yesterday's massive outage where Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram went down for many, many hours, and felt cute, might delete later, became very real about the Facebook servers for a few hours. They realized this week was going to be bad when 60 Minutes aired Frances Hogan, I believe, who is a whistleblower from Facebook, who had a quote that really struck me. Facebook realized if they change the algorithm to be safer, people will spend less time on the site, they'll click less ads, and they'll make less money. There you go. I mean, that is in a nutshell what you've got. They have weaponized and monetized in a large scale that can be almost unimaginable even 5 years ago, a platform that feeds people all the worst possible information about the political climate in the country. If you're If you're observing it from afar, you've always suspected it, but now we have a whistleblower who's come out with a trench of enormous, tens of thousands apparently of documents. And she talks about in 2018 how they changed the Facebook algorithm to drag people into the more content. So if you can click on something once, you'll get more of it and more of it and more of it, and it optimizes your viewing and keeps you on the platform. No matter what it's feeding you, it's going to find a way to keep you clicking, keep you moving. And after or before the 2020 election, she also revealed that Facebook had these safety protocols to prevent violence, essentially. Well, right after the election, they turned them off. And as you might have noticed, 2 months and a few days after the election, we ended up with January 6th, where an awful lot of this stop the steal and stolen election rhetoric had been in place, and where it grew and metastasized and motivated a lot of people to do the things that happened and catalyzed them so that when they heard the orders from Trump and his people, they moved forward. There was one document. Oh, by the way, those controls are still off. There was one document that said, we have evidence of a variety of sources that hate speech, divisive political speech, and misinformation on Facebook and its family of apps are affecting societies around the world. Well, yeah, he's got 3 billion customers, y'all. 3 billion subjects in the empire of Facebook, and they are fed a constant diet of agitprop and bizarre stuff that you ask yourself, why is my grandmother or my aunt or my uncle or my mom or my dad or my neighbor down the street, why do they believe that they should eat horse paste instead of take a vaccine? Facebook has a lot to do with it, an awful lot to do with it. They could at any moment, with the click of a mouse, change the ball game. They could end this disinformation stuff on COVID. They could de-emphasize hate speech. They have a lot of options. They just choose not to exercise them. And now we kind of understand why they dissolved their civic integrity unit back after January 6th. And we understand why they were so vulnerable to Steve Bannon and Cambridge Analytica basically scraping millions and millions of users' data out of their system to use to manipulate the 2016 election. So over time, and from time immemorial, we sort of understood that threats to democracy, threats to nations, they arise from economic or military threats. They arise from changes in society that were driven by things that were explicable and understandable for thousands of years. Well, now we have something that's tearing society apart that is less explicable. No one outside of Facebook understands the algorithm. They don't get the methodology that's pushing all this misinformation and disinformation. And so we ended up in a place where we woke up, we opened our eyes to it in 2016 as it finally started to hit how manipulated a lot of people were by it. And now we're at a point where we know from the inside now. And we know from the inside that they started to push this. They started to push this as a profitable hate and division are profitable for Facebook. And, maybe they're going to keep doing it. Maybe they won't. It is time. And I say this as an economic conservative. It is time when you find a corporate threat to the country that you eventually have to face it. And you have to deal with it. Speaking of corporate threats to the country, I just want to say Corey Lewandowski, also known to his friends as Hannibal, sometimes Dexter if you know him well, bragged this weekend about killing people with an ice pick and having murdered something like 10 people. He bragged when he was hitting on it at an event when he was there with his client / something, Kristi Noem. Corey's no longer there at the MAGA Super PAC, the Make America Great Again Super PAC, but he was one of 2 members of the board, so he wouldn't fire himself. So they had to spin up in Trump world an entirely new super PAC known, hand to God, as MAGA. It sounds like something out of Monty Python, but it's Make America Great Again. They were very rushed about doing it, so the Lincoln Project owns a bunch of the MAGA addresses now, for which we will have some fun and pranks as we go forward. One other thing, Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General of Florida, and Kimberly Guilfoyle will be running MAGA. So prepare for hilarity on that front. And Is it sexist to say they're going to have a cat fight? Because they're going to have a cat fight. Neither one of those people get along with other people. It's going to be delicious. All right. Also in Florida news, really quickly, we told you a few months ago we were going to drive a wedge between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. And we did. We ran ads in Bedminster and in Palm Beach where we told Donald Trump Ron DeSantis was coming for him, take his crown, kick his ass, gonna become the favorite of Fox News. Sure enough, this week, Donald Trump finally did what he always does when we take up rent in his head and have late parties at night. If I faced him, I would beat him like I beat everyone else, Trump declared, even as he said he doesn't actually expect the showdown. So we're looking forward to Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis continuing the decline of their bromance. It's really going to be something to weep a little, cry a little tear about. So let's jump to another piece of Trump news. Sorry, guys. I'm not as smooth at this as Tara is. She actually knows what she's doing on TV. I'm just sort of an enthusiastic amateur. Tonight, it was announced that Forbes has no longer included Donald Trump on their wealthiest Americans list. The cutoff was $400 million. Here's a spoiler. He was never actually on the list. He bullshitted them and lied to them and told them he was on the list. He wasn't. So anyway, let's jump to the ad we ran against Donald Trump with and Ron DeSantis that drove Trump so crazy that now he's decided he's going to put DeSantis on blast and hate him with a great degree of vigor.
In Florida, the new hotbed of the pandemic, ambulance service is overwhelmed by emergency calls.
Florida is in crisis. Where is Governor Ron DeSantis? Laughing it up in New Jersey, raising money for himself. He ran as a mini-me Donald Trump.
Build the wall.
Now he's trying to prove he's more Trump than Trump and doesn't care how many Floridians have to die. Ron DeSantis, the worst governor in America.
Well, let's bring Tara Setmeyer in now. Tara, have you recovered the beast?
Oh my God. Okay, so this was the most awful hour of my life. Anyone who is a cat owner of an indoor cat that does not go outside ever, the worst nightmare is when you find a door open to your cat getting outside of your house in the dark when you live on the woods. So this happened about 45 minutes before we were supposed to go on air. I discovered that Tiki decided to venture on outside because a door blew open from the wind. And I had a collective freak out. And I went outside screaming his name with his somethings, which are his treats. And I call his catnip drugs, and yelling for him, Tiki, Tiki, come on. And eventually, about 5 minutes before we were supposed to go live on air, he sauntered back in through the garage. So I'm here now. It's I'm a little dressed down because I just threw on a hat, threw on a little lipstick, and here I am to join you tonight. What did I miss? Did I miss anything?
I was going through the vicissitudes of Trump world, and we were just talking about how we'd split a wedge between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis.
Oh,
By the way, I want to take 1 second just to say, politics can be pretty elbows out and vicious. But I know everyone here at the Lincoln Project wishes Casey DeSantis a swift and complete recovery from breast cancer. And yeah. I mean that, folks. It's one of the things we just do not joke about in this business. No matter how much you dislike somebody on the other side of your political equation, be a decent person. Don't be a dickhead about it.
We actually have souls here still. We may be political fighters, but we're actually people that still have our souls intact. So
now I'll make fun of your ass if you get COVID because you're a radio talk show host and don't get vaccinated, and you tell people to take ivermectin. I'll make fun of you then. You brought that problem on you. But no, we just want to wish her a swift recovery.
And indeed. And it's my understanding that we're going to talk a little Virginia politics tonight with one of my colleagues there over at the Center for Politics at UVA, where I am a resident scholar. I believe that we have Kyle Kondik with us next to talk a little bit about what the hell's happening here in Virginia and why we all should care, even those of us who don't live in Virginia. I happen to, but there's lots of folks who watch us that don't. But this race does have some national implications, considering it is now a bellwether state here in Virginia. And, Democrats won the state by 10 points last year. Mm-hmm. This race is effectively a toss-up now, and it shouldn't be. So let's bring in Kyle to chat a little bit about what's going on in VA. There he is, Kyle Kondik. What is going on, my friend?
Thanks for having me.
Glad you're with us.
Let me properly introduce you, since I know you and I know what you do, but everyone else doesn't. Kyle is the managing editor of Sabato's Crystal Ball over at the University of Virginia's Center for Politics, as I just mentioned. It's one of the most authoritative, nonpartisan newsletters on American campaigns and elections. That's also where Professor Larry Sabato runs the center. His new book is The Long Red Thread: How Democratic Dominance Gave Way to Republican Advantage in the U.S. House Elections. And he is with us now. So, Kyle, I'm sure you heard the opening discussion about what we're doing and why. But we want to talk first about what's happening here in Virginia. Why in the hell is Terry McAuliffe in a virtual tie with Glenn Youngkin?
Look, I mean, the Virginia governor's race is always one of the first big national or nationally watched races after the presidential. And if you go back and look at the modern history of Virginia gubernatorial races, when the Republicans first won the governorship in 1969 after a long string of conservative Democratic dominance, just like in so many other southern states, you see this pattern in which the president's party often struggles in this sort of one of these first tests after the presidential election. Usually the president's party does a lot worse in the Virginia gubernatorial race than they did in Virginia the year prior. And Terry McAuliffe is the only person to win the governor's race and share a party with the occupant of the White House. Every other time Virginia has voted, ever since 1973, has voted against the president's party. And so at the very least, you would not expect, just based on the historical patterns, you wouldn't expect Terry McAuliffe to, match or exceed Joe Biden's very impressive 10-point win in Virginia. And, this race, I really thought this race was going to be close the whole time. I was sort of waiting to see who the Republicans nominated. I think they probably could have gone with kind of a more conservative choice. I mean, I think Glenn Youngkin is basically kind of a mainstream conservative Republican, just like McAuliffe is a mainstream liberal Democrat. Youngkin's got a lot of money to bring to bear here. I think he's performed fine as a candidate. Basically, I think McAuliffe's performed fine as a candidate. And, it seems relatively close. I still think McAuliffe has a little bit of an edge based on where Virginia is right now. But it's close and competitive. And I think, if in fact Youngkin were to win, I think it would really set off some alarm bells for Democrats, at the midway point between the presidential and the midterm coming up next year.
So before you ask that question, Rick, I think we should show Kyle and our viewers the latest Lincoln Project ad that we dropped today, because I think it speaks to something that Kyle brought up, where he said that, well, Glenn Youngkin's kind of a moderate Republican. He's, there's some others that are a little more conservative. Is he? Is he really? He kind of acts like that when he's in some parts of Virginia, but he acts a whole lot more MAGA when he's in others. Check out our new ad, Glenn Trumpkin.
Who is Glenn Youngkin? Depends on where he is that day. In Northern Virginia, he pretends to be a moderate Republican. This version of Youngkin won't tell the truth about his views on abortion or gun control. He even admits Joe Biden won fair and square.
Joe Biden's our president.
But all that changes when he travels to MAGA country. That's when you'll see the real Youngkin. He brags about getting Trump's endorsement.
And I thanked him for it.
Does campaign events with the same stop-the-steal criminals that attacked our Capitol. Youngkin even backs wild conspiracies about Trump being reinstalled as president soon. He'd change his name to Glenn Trumpkin to win. He'd govern like Trump, too. Just like his pals Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott. He may be Glenn Youngkin in Northern Virginia, but he's Glenn Trumpkin everywhere else.
The Lincoln Project paid for and is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Take it away, Wilson.
Kyle, I think one thing that people, for a long time, people in my generation looked at Virginia as this very red state. And I was hoping you could just describe a little bit about the transition of Virginia in the last 10 to 15 years, about how it has really moved. I think I would make an argument faster ideologically from the center right to center left or left than any other state in the country, especially in Northern Virginia.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair point, and certainly Virginia's transition to becoming first a purple state and now kind of I would guess I would describe it maybe as a light blue state, and almost sort of moving from being the state that had the capital of the old Confederacy and was sort of one of the exemplars of the old South. To a state that you could almost lump in now with the Mid-Atlantic and the sort of the so-called the Acela corridor, that all the reporters take up to New York and Boston, et cetera, and the politicians. But what you see, I think what you see in Virginia is that, if you look at the Midwest, for instance, there was this trade-off going on in the electorate. The Democrats are picking up more and more kind of white-collar professionals, white college-educated folks in suburban areas. And the Democrats were losing a lot of blue-collar folks, particularly in kind of rural and small-town areas. So if you go across, the Scrantons and Youngstowns of the world, places outside of big city areas, et cetera. And so that change in the electorate really helped the Republicans in the Midwest, I think, because a lot of those states are they don't have particularly high four-year college attainment. They're whiter than the national average, et cetera. However, that trade-off has not worked well for Republicans in states like Virginia. I think you can lump Colorado in as another state that's like that. And Georgia, I think, is another great example that Democrats finally flipped in 2000 and 2021 in the Senate races and in the presidential race, because you have these kind of job magnet zones like Northern Virginia and Metro Atlanta, Greater Denver, to mention those three states, and even Charlotte. To the extent that North Carolina is changing, that's still kind of a more of a lean Republican state, but that state's changing too. And these states they have relatively high four-year college attainment, and they're diverse and they're growing. And, the Republican Party used to do really well in some of those places. You could look at, George W. Bush in Northern Virginia in 2000 and 2004, and, he does pretty well there, relatively speaking. But now it's just turned into this bloodbath for Republicans. And, you do see the pro-Republican trends in what my old colleague, Jeff Skelly, who was with us as Center for Politics. He's now at 538. He referred to the region called as ROVA, rest of Virginia, outside of Northern Virginia, outside of Greater Richmond, and outside of Hampton Roads. And so if you go particularly like west of Charlottesville, particularly west of Roanoke, you can see that, a lot of those are places where, like Mark Warner in 2001, when he ran as kind of a moderate Democrat and was running ads about NASCAR and stuff, he did pretty well in Western Virginia. Now, Democrats get blown out in Western Virginia, outside of, Roanoke and Charlottesville, et cetera. But the growth for Republicans there is dwarfed by the growth for Democrats in many other parts of the state. And you can almost see the Democratic trend from Northern Virginia and some of the other kind of heavily populated places sort of bleeding out to other parts of the state, like Fredericksburg, for instance, Stafford County. That's a pretty long hike from Washington, D.C. along 95. But Joe Biden actually won that county in 2020. Yeah. And, so at the very least for Youngkin, he needs to claw back some of these places. Chesterfield County in the Richmond suburbs, that used to be a really Republican county. Really? And that has since flipped to Democrats in a few recent elections. So at the very least, Youngkin needs to stop the bleeding. I think I do see him as sort of more of like Mitt Romney didn't win Virginia, but he did a heck of a lot better than Trump did, particularly compared to 2020. Youngkin, I think, is more kind of from that camp, although he faces this difficult dance of trying to, try to appeal to the middle and also, appeal to the right and appeal to the Trump folks, because the Trump folks alone aren't enough to get it done in Virginia, obviously.
No.
Well, here's an example of that. Today in Politico, there's a story that Youngkin is now calling for an election audit in Virginia, that the voting machines should be audited. And the way that he's cleverly trying to frame this, where he's walking both sides of the fence here, both lines here, is that he's saying that, listen, I'm a businessman. We do audits all the time in business. There's nothing wrong with doing audits to make sure all the ducks are in a row. So why shouldn't we just, make sure that the election machines are, it's election integrity here. And one of the first things he wants to do is have an election integrity task force if he becomes governor. This is this is the big lie. Trying to you're trying to shine shit is basically what he's trying to do here with this by saying, well, no, it's just like any other business audit. No, it isn't. he's feeding into this big lie that there's some question. Isn't it true, Kyle, you know this, in the state of Virginia, they already do election audits, and they did one this year. They do this on a regular basis as part of Virginia's election administration, and everything was deemed just fine. So that's a perfect example of where he's trying to walk the line and placate the MAGAs with this big lie thing because Trump endorsed him and you don't want to make them upset, and try to sound reasonable.
Yes, but was it a forensic audit? That's the key.
Right.
No, I mean, look, I think that, I think Virginia runs pretty good elections. Actually, if you're curious about election data, geek stuff like we are, that they have a great archive of election results at the state site. One thing, and just to I don't have any real concern about election problems in Virginia. Of course, I think Youngkin has sort of brought that up from time to time, and
right.
The McAuliffe campaign has tried to talk about those things as ways that they can try to tie Youngkin to Trump, which is really what they want. And obviously, you all are trying to do that in your own messaging on this race too. Speaking of just the sort of the vote counting and what have you in Virginia, one thing that just when you're watching the results in a few weeks when they come in is that oftentimes, and this was particularly true in 2020 because Virginia had a lot of early and particularly mail-in voting, and Virginia is not a heavy mail-in and early voting state historically. And so you may have seen that there's been some stories about how the early and mail-in vote is relatively light compared to 2020. Well, first of all, it's not a presidential race, and also, unlike, say, Rick, like Florida, your state, Florida is a state where tons of people have, vote by mail or vote early. Virginia doesn't have that kind of tradition, and so I don't know what to make of these numbers. But what often happens is that, I think that Virginia was easily called for Mark Warner and Biden in 2020, even though for most of the night Warner was losing and Biden was losing too, but then they both ended up winning by double digits. So just keep that in mind, because often, like Fairfax County, which is a big vote engine in Northern Virginia, huge county, their results often come in late, or there's I think they have like an absentee precinct that comes in that's like a big blue dump of votes. So just keep that in mind on election night.
As long as there's no dump trucks of votes at like midnight, right? The dump truck came in and the votes. I'm only kidding. That's what Trump claimed happened in Detroit, right?
I think though that the Northern Virginia transformation into being what do you think? What do you think that Youngkin has to get in Northern Virginia to make it work? I think it's like 43, 44.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know exactly the numbers, in part because of it sort of depends on the turnout mix too. If quote Rova, sort of punches above its weight and the turnout is big for those places. It's a lot of small counties. They do add up to a significant number of votes, but also if turnout is sort of down, particularly kind of as you get closer to Washington, D.C. So I don't know if I would put a specific number on it, but look, I mean, when Ed Gillespie almost beat Mark Warner in 2014, he actually carried Loudoun County, which is I believe either is the most affluent county in the country or is really close, and it's very high
up there.
Yeah, it's top 3.
And that county is sort of forms the heart of the 10th congressional district, which was another place that voted for Romney in 2012 and then voted for Biden by close to, I think, about 20 points. So
Barbara Comstock's district, right?
Right, exactly.
And
so
she lost.
She lost to Democrat Jennifer Wexton in 2018, and that's really not even a battleground district anymore. But again, Gillespie actually carried Loudoun. He lost to Warner by a little under percentage points statewide. I don't think there's really any way Youngkin would actually carry Loudoun or Prince William, which is another big kind of suburban, exurban Northern Virginia county. But he needs to do better there than getting sort of blown out by 20 plus points. So I would watch the margins in those places. And in terms of actual places for Youngkin to flip if he's going to win, I think Virginia Beach is an obvious place. I think Trump did relatively poorly there for Republican. It's kind of a Republican-leaning swing area. Military heavy, obviously, with both veterans and active service folks. That's an important place to watch in the state as a swing area. I'd suspect that if Youngkin were to win, he'd be carrying Virginia Beach. He'd be carrying a place like Chesterfield, I mentioned, outside of Richmond or in the Richmond suburbs. Again, doesn't have to carry like a Loudoun or Prince William, but can't get just slaughtered there the way that Republicans have, particularly since Trump has been on the ballot.
So before we talk about Project Homefire, which is something that the Center for Politics down there at UVA is involved in, and really interesting. We're going to talk about that in a second. I have one last question about the Virginia race. You know, I think there's an enthusiasm gap problem that the McAuliffe campaign is a little nervous about. And they need to, I think that they need to make sure that they get the people that they need out. Here in Northern Virginia, the independents that voted for Biden that would probably lean Republican in normal times, in the before times, there may be some soft support there for McAuliffe now, and I think that that's where they're nervous, because right now the 538 average actually has McAuliffe up by 4 points. It's 40. I think it's what do I have here? It's 47.3 to 44.4. That's like statistically kind of a tie at this point in the race. They should be over 50%, right? So what do you think they need to do for this enthusiasm gap, or am I imagining it? Maybe there isn't one.
Well, look, the polling has been a little all over the map on this, in that you've got the Washington Post and Charter School. George Mason did a poll, and they had McAuliffe up by 6 amongst registered voters, but only up by 3 amongst the smaller universe of likely voters.
Right.
You also have Monmouth, who did a poll that essentially said that both the most enthusiastic and kind of the least enthusiastic voters were Youngkin supporters. So therefore, they sort of suggested that a high turnout environment might benefit Youngkin. I guess I personally think that Democrats benefit from higher turnout in Virginia. There's this thing about, Democrats always benefit from high turnout. I don't think that's true everywhere, but I think it is probably true in Virginia, because a higher turnout probably means younger voters are coming out, voters of color are coming out, and some of those kind of presidential, people more interested in the presidential race who show up. Turnout was very high in 17 and 18 in Virginia, and Virginia Democrats did great in both of those elections. And I do think, again, this enthusiasm thing is something to watch. And also, does the early vote actually tell us anything? Because again, compared to 2020, it's very low. But on the other hand, those comparisons may not be all that useful, given the lack of early voting history in Virginia, and the fact that obviously it's not a presidential race. We just saw basically historic turnout all over the country for the presidential. You're not going to see it in the gubernatorial race, but you probably will see at least a somewhat engaged electorate. But again, even some of the polling is sort of tells us a different story about who benefits from high turnout. Again, I think it's McAuliffe personally. But there's some data you could point to that suggests maybe the other way, that maybe Youngkin might be able to activate some of the irregular Trump voters. But, we've seen that, some of those folks, they're only coming out for Trump, as we think the Georgia runoffs, I think, really helped kind of tell that tale, in that particular race. And that was kind of a surprise to me that, Democrats ended up winning those races. And there was just a little bit better turnout for Democrats than Republicans then.
Them too.
One thing I'm curious about, how do you think the down ballot races in Virginia look right now for the legislative seats?
So first of all, Virginia elects its lieutenant governor separately and elects an attorney general. And the recent history has suggested we probably shouldn't expect that much difference between, among the 3 statewide races, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general. Maybe if the governor's race is like a 1 or 2 point race, maybe one of the other races could go the other way. But I'd expect either, one side to sweep them or the other side to sweep them, with the governor's race kind of leading the way there. And House of Delegates, even though it's 2021, we're after the 2020 census, because the census data were delivered so late. Virginia is still on the old House of Delegates map, which is kind of sort of Republican gerrymander, although it was changed pretty significantly by the courts in advance of the 2019 election, which helped unpack, I guess, some of these districts and give Democrats a better chance to win. And they capitalized. They won a 55-45 majority in the House of Delegates. There are a lot of competitive seats across the map. I think if Youngkin wins, he very well could bring in a Republican House of Delegates too. And I think there's also a scenario where maybe McAuliffe wins by just a little bit, and Republicans, either maybe get to a tie in the House of Delegates or maybe even flip it. And, places to watch. Again, there's sort of some of the same places to watch for the governor's race. There's some competitive seats in Virginia Beach, for instance, and scattered over other parts of the state. Now, the state Senate is not up this time, so Republicans cannot win a governing trifecta. The Democrats have a 21-19 edge in the state Senate, and those races aren't up until 2023. But the Republicans could could potentially get the governorship and a House of Delegates. I mean, it's certainly not impossible to imagine.
Well, there's lots of
Yowza.
mailers going out. Yeah, we've gotten at least 3 mailers a day from various groups about voting early, voting in the House of Delegates race. And I still get some Republican Youngkin stuff, and I have not gotten any McAuliffe stuff, which is interesting. I don't know what's happening there, but because Virginia, you don't have to register.
They may not have modeled you properly. But.
No, they've modeled my husband, which is it's a whole thing. But it's interesting to watch who they're targeting and how. All right, let's shift a little bit because you guys have done something called Project Homefire. This is something that a project that the Center for Politics is working on, and you have come up with some very interesting polling data that I think is alarming to some degree, looking at some of those results. Tell us, what is Project Homefire and what are some of the top line numbers and information that you've gleaned so far from your polling?
Yeah, so Project Homefire is a new group. It's not part of the Center for Politics, but they're working with us. And
joint.
We know some of the folks over there, including Lawrence Shack, who is a pretty accomplished guy who's a former student of Professor Sabato's, and he wanted to develop a kind of a polling data analytics project to kind of look at some of the deep divides amongst Biden and Trump voters. And so he and some of his colleagues came up with a really innovative polling project. It's a long survey with a lot of different questions, and they can sort of look at how people respond to the different questions. They're all measured on a 0 to 100 scale, from complete 0 is completely disagreeing, 100 is completely agreeing with a certain statement, and try to figure out ways in which there are different kinds of Trump voters, different kinds of Biden voters, and maybe in certain ways there are places where Biden voters and Trump voters maybe overlap a little bit. So we put out some of the findings last week. And one of the things we did find was that on some of the kind of bread and butter issues that are part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed the Senate and is still is held up in the House as Democrats try to figure out what to do with it and their bigger Democrats only reconciliation package. But you do see a lot of support basically across party lines for hard infrastructure, bridges, roads, et cetera. Even things like rural broadband, for instance, is another thing that polls pretty well with both Biden and Trump voters. But then you get to other questions, and you find a little more than half of Trump voters expressing at least some support for the Trump states seceding from the union. Biden voters, it was around 40%, at least some support. Now, I don't think that's actually going to happen. But it does.
Wait a minute. Wait. You just said that 40% of Biden supporters agree with seceding. Some states should secede from the union. So that's a pretty significant number. So it's not just Trump people that are looking at, this, what we think is a batshit crazy concept of seceding from the union, but you actually have 40% of Biden supporters. Did that surprise you?
Yeah, I guess a little bit. Although the thing is that I think we sort of thought that the two sides would express a lot of animus toward each other because that's sort of the world that we're living in.
Right.
And so when you get these findings, it's not I guess it's kind of disappointing and alarming, but also not surprising, I guess, if that's maybe I'm maybe I'm not using the right words there, but
we're cynics now.
I do. It is easy to be cynical about American politics and about the divide between the two groups of voters. And, I think that also it's, Rick, you were talking about Facebook at the start of the show and about how, and I think I basically agree that, if you look at, what is the growth of social media done to American politics? I think the effect has probably been negative in terms of, making it essentially easy for conspiracy-minded people to essentially get together. I think it's turned almost everybody into a publisher, and so in some ways, I guess that's democratizing. But on the other hand, I think there's a lot of frankly bad information out there. And also, if you really dislike the other side, then I think you're apt to believe the worst about the other side too. And right. So, and there's no shortage of that kind of content out there. So, frankly, there's just a lot of distrust, a lot of anger, and it's unfortunate, but it's something that I think we have to kind of look at and understand as a country.
And so you guys are going to be releasing this in parts, right? So there's There'll be more information coming out. How often are you releasing it? And I think we have the link of where people can go to read it. It's fascinating. If you dive deeper into the questions and look at the range of answers and the way the questions were asked, it's very, very fascinating. To see how susceptible both sides are to kind of giving up some of your democratic norms and institutions in order to achieve their aims. That's something that's concerning also, because that's chipping away at public trust in our institutions. And so it's in there, but just tell folks where they can find the information, and I'll make sure that we put up the link too.
Yeah, centerforpolitics.org/crystal ball. While you're there, you also can sign up for free for our newsletter. We come out a couple times a week, but we did our first report on Thursday, as you mentioned. We did a little update today, kind of digging a little bit deeper into specifically that secession question we were just talking about, just because of the, when you put this information out, you never quite know like what people will be interested in. And that question ended up getting a lot of attention and a lot of media coverage. So we went a little bit deeper into that, and you probably won't be surprised by this finding, but I think it's interesting nonetheless. And that is that you basically see a connection between people who believe in certain kinds of conspiracy theories and support for secession one way or the other, which I thought was, I know it's not shocking, but we did want to sort of
it's good to bolt it down though, because I think it is I think calls for secession are a very dangerous place to end up, politically speaking. If you believe that your system is so fundamentally broken, your elections are so invalid that you have to withdraw from the union, not since 1860 have we gone down that particular bad road.
Right, that's right, and we're not trying to go down that road again.
Yeah, let's avoid that.
Right. Kyle Kondik, thank you so much. We appreciate you. You are a wealth of knowledge. Give my best to Professor Sabato and the folks down there at Center for Politics. And we hope to have you guys back as the midterms come around, and we'll get more of your crystal ball analysis in midterms. Appreciate it, Kyle.
Thank you, Kyle.
There's such a good bunch down there. I enjoy working with them.
Just brilliant. Just a bunch of brilliant people. And it is, Virginia is a great laboratory for studying what's happening in this country.
Yes,
it truly is. It is fascinating.
I mean, I lived in New Jersey for part of the 2016 campaign, and then part of the up until 2018 of the Trump administration. And New Jersey isn't as interesting politically as Virginia is, because it's such a reliably blue state.
Right.
But coming here now, and I make a point to vote in all elections, but it's really important how close the legislature is here in Virginia. To Kyle's point, it's true. Virginia is not known as an early voting state. This is kind of a new thing that they're doing here. So it's the idea of being able to early vote, I think people are still getting used to that. But everything runs smoothly here, and it's when we used to say Missouri was the bellwether state,
right,
or Ohio, I think that's Virginia now, given the demographics. That's why we're talking about it, because there are probably folks that are like, we don't live in Virginia, what do we care? This is why it has national implications, because this is a blueprint for what Republicans may do in swing districts coming up in 2022. And if Democrats mess this up, they really, they need to panic, because it could be a slaughter in the midterms for them.
If anyone on the Democratic side says things like, we have to get our policy about X or Y out there, smack them. Because this is a race that is going to come down to whether or not you nationalize the poison of Trump's republicanism into Glenn Youngkin. We're going to try to help do that, because we believe also at the Lincoln Project, it's vitally important not to let people pretend that this is normal. That's and not to let them pretend that this is how the country, actually should behave. Because, the idea that you're going to have election audits, you're going to do these things, it is a slippery slope, and you will go further and further and further down. And within a few months, because remember, guys, Ron DeSantis needed Donald Trump's endorsement because he was perceived as a more moderate Republican candidate. Greg Abbott was a longtime center-right, George W. Bush style squish Republican. None of these things make sense on paper until you understand that Trumpism has broken the GOP as we once knew it. And so we don't want to have Republican candidates out there who are going to fake it and pretend they're one thing, because once you cede that ground to the bully, and you tell Trump he can control what you say and do, he will always try to do so.
And we have seen how many people it's broken. I know earlier you gave a little update on Trump world. Mike Pence is out here, speaking of just someone who's pathetic in every sense of the word. Mike Pence was on Sean Hannity last night, I think, going on and on about how him and Trump are in the foxhole together for 5 years and how they're buddy old pals, and and saying how blaming the media for over-reporting January 6th, and that we need to just move forward. We need to just look at the future. These people tried to fucking kill you, Mike Pence.
If I may remind the former vice president, the chant of "Hang Mike Pence" was loud and long. And yet, those people weren't randomly sent there by foreign power. They were sent there by Donald Trump.
Correct. And they would do it again. They have no appetite for him, even though he was so obedient to his master. They have no appetite for it. They would do it again, the MAGA people. So, Mike, no matter how much you try to lick the boots, they're still going to kick you. And also Nikki Haley. She's out there now talking about how Donald Trump is the Republican Party, and she can't imagine a Republican Party like before without Donald Trump. Nikki Haley needs to cut it out.
Her consultant, Nick Ayers. Her consultant, Nick Ayers, is like the worst job in America.
Unbelievable.
On the one hand, he's like, she's super talented. And
no, she's not.
Well,
what has she done?
I'm giving you his argument.
Oh, okay.
She's super talented. She was a woman governor in the South. But the fact is, no matter what she wants, Trump now controls the agenda. No matter what Ron DeSantis wants, Trump controls the agenda. No matter what Greg Abbott or Ted Cruz or Josh Hawley or Marco Rubio or Tom Cotton or any of these other morons want, Trump controls the agenda. He runs the Republican Party from top to bottom. He will be the nominee if he wants to be the nominee.
That's right. Like he said, I think you talked about it earlier, right? When he did the interview with Yahoo Finance over the weekend, they released it yesterday in full, where they asked him about DeSantis, and he was like, I'll beat him just like I'll beat everybody else. I mean, DeSantis and all of their love fest there, that goes right out the window. Trump doesn't give a damn about Ron DeSantis. You want to know something else funny before we end the show?
Yeah.
John Bolton has a super PAC. And Bolton's super PAC is polling. I think that's what it's called with the exclamation points. Yes, Stash PAC. It's like Squatch Watch, Panda Watch, Stash PAC. MAGA again. There's a theme here. There's a theme here. And then there's Jeb. Oh, poor Jeb. Didn't he start the one-word exclamation? Please clap.
Yeah, it was actually Lamar before Jeb.
Oh, was it with the plaid? Anyway,
and the exclamation point.
That was many moons ago when Republicans were still sane. Anyway, so the John Bolton PAC had a poll out that was 1,000 registered voters that had Trump and DeSantis tied.
Dun, dun, dun.
Tied. So I'm sure that got back to Trump and didn't make him very happy. Now there's other more reliable polls that have Trump beating DeSantis by a lot, but still, I just think this whole thing is hilarious, and we're going to continue to poke the bear there because nothing bothers Trump more than people thinking that he's a loser and that he's broke, and he's both. So before we end the show tonight, over the weekend, this exhibit that's at the Lincoln Memorial, I'm sure some folks have seen it on the news. There was an art installation at the Lincoln Memorial of flags that represented all of the people who died from COVID-19. I had an opportunity to go there last weekend. Some of the gals from the Lincoln Project who were in DC for the Women's March also had an opportunity to go there. And Rick, I've got to tell you, it's pretty moving. It brought me to tears because you stand there amongst this sea of tragedy. And it's tragedy that actually didn't have to happen. And I think we have a video of it and a compilation of some of those photos. We can run that now. But you stand there and they have a big sign that has a counter. When I was there, it was at 684,000. I think by the time it ended, it was over 700,000, more than the Spanish flu. tragedy in 1918. I mean, it was a very powerful and emotional display. And I'm glad that they did it because people needed to see it. And when I was there, I saw families hugging, people just sitting there amongst the flags. You could also write notes on each one. They were like white flags, and you could write personal notes to the loved ones that they lost or friends that they lost. And reading some of those notes, it just tore me up, because you look at people that are mourning their loved ones and you just think of how many of these, deaths could have been prevented. How many of those flags are representing people who listen to Facebook and these conspiracy theories, and it cost them their lives. So I just wanted to, we're having a technical difficulty, but we will post the pictures on our social media for those who haven't seen it yet. It's not there anymore. I wish they could have kept it up longer, but definitely something to really drive home the importance of getting the vaccine.
They say they have the video now. We can run it.
Ah, we can run it now. Okay. So let's take a look. Yeah, it was pretty emotional.
Imposing.
Yeah.
It's something.
So on that note, we want to say to everyone, please, if you aren't vaccinated, please get your vaccine. Do not become another statistic.
Please.
On that note, Rick, I think that's it for today. It's been an eventful Tuesday. Tiki's sitting here next to me, safe and sound. Thank God. All is well in the world again. And we will see you on Thursday at 8 o'clock. Also, we're speaking tomorrow night at 8. Make sure you tune in. See you then.
Thanks, everybody.